Chapter 501. Therion Part 1. I'm still struggling to comprehend what we should be doing in the Citadel itself. The fact that the Intel organization might be a part of Therion does not change the fact that they might be able to give us the information we seek, Shin said, facing Northern. You are indeed right, but isn't the entire reason we are going to a discrete Intel organization so that we can be discreet? Exactly. Won't all of that be blown to dust if we go straight to Therion and start announcing what we want to do? Northern let out a cunning grin, lingering for more than a second before weighing in. I was thinking of a trap. Instead of moving under the nose of the devil, how about we just come face to face with him? Shin raised a brow. He was still very confused at all that Northern had been saying. But he wasn't to be blamed. Aside from when it concerned combat, critical thinking had never been his strong forte. You'll understand. Let's head to Therion, father. Shin sighed and brought out their pouch of money, shaking it as he spoke. I don't know if this will be enough to register us as drifters under Therion. Private citadels charge insane amounts for registration, and their tariff on rifts is even astronomical. Don't worry, we won't need to register. Shin looked at him with an even more puzzled expression. He lingered for a few seconds before tiredly asking, So what exactly are we going there to do? We are going there to place a request. The Citadel also accepts requests from civilians, drifters, and governments as long as we put a price. Shin thought for a moment before responding, That's indeed true. It's easy for anyone to forget because it wasn't a thing people did every time, except for governments that place bounty requests on criminals. Northern moved forward, saying to Shin and Ryan, Let's go. After a few minutes of trekking and cutting corners, the trio approached the gates of the Citadel, where iron and stone intertwined to form an imposing barrier that loomed over all who dared draw near. Tall, wrought iron gates stood before them, guarded by sentinels in gleaming armor, their spears glinting like polished silver under the warm morning star. Shin stepped forward, bringing out his temporary protector ID card. I have come to place a request with the guild. The two nightly dressed security guards looked at each other. Then one of them proceeded to open a part of the barred gate, allowing them to enter. As Northern passed beneath the archway, his eyes traced the intricacies carved into the gateposts. Scenes of battles long forgotten, heroes and legends etched into the very fabric of the stone. Beyond the gates, the Citadel compound sprawled like a world of its own. An expanse of manicured gardens, courtyards, and pathways that stretched towards the central keep, the heart of this fortress of power. The air inside was cooler, tinged with the faint scent of flowering vines that climbed the high stone walls, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the stern gray of the stone. Gravel crunched beneath their boots as they stepped onto the main pathway. A wide avenue lined with statues of heroes passed, both male and female, their marble forms frozen in postures of regal authority. The gardens, despite their pristine beauty, had a sense of order that spoke of control rather than serenity. Neatly trimmed hedges and towering topiaries flanked the path, each plant meticulously groomed into shapes of animals or geometric forms, as though even nature itself had to submit to the Citadel's rule. Small fountains bubbled along the edges, their waters sparkling like crystal as they trickled over ornate basins of carved stone. The soft murmur of water was the only sound that broke the stillness, aside from the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer in one of the outer yards. The main building of the Citadel seemed to swallow the light as they neared it, casting long shadows across the compound. The great wooden doors, reinforced with steel, were adorned with intricate carvings of symbols and swirling designs that told of incomprehensible ancient power. Another set of two knights stood before them, motionless as statues, their armor polished to a blinding sheen. Northern stood and observed the symbols and design of the door around while Shin showed the knights his ID and said to them what he had told those outside. With a nod from the guards, the doors creaked open, revealing a cavernous hall beyond, bustling with activities. To their left, a vast lounge sprawled beneath high ceilings adorned with chandeliers fashioned from pure crystal. Each shard refracted light into shimmering rainbows, casting a soft, welcoming glow over the lounge's plush, velvet-clad armchairs and gilded tables. Deep within the room, drifters lounged in comfort, some reclining in worn leather armchairs with boots propped on stools. Others clustered around intricately carved wooden tables, engaged in lively conversation. The air here was filled with the rich scent of oak, leather, and the sweet tang of expensive spirits. A bar, stationed prominently against the far wall, was no humble watering hole. Crafted from dark mahogany and polished to a mirror sheen, it stretched along one side of the grand chamber, staffed by bartenders in fine attire. Rows of glass bottles glimmered behind them, filled with rare and exotic liquors from distant lands, amber wines, deep burgundies, and glowing blue potions that promised more than just a pleasant buzz. A few patrons stood leaning against the bar, sharing tales of their latest exploits, laughter and song mixing with the occasional clink of glass against wood. Above the bar, a collection of ornate weapons, shields, and other items hung on display. To their right, a massive notice board dominated the wall, its surface covered in an assortment of scrolls and parchment, each one bearing a different request or contract, mostly bounty requests from the government. From lowly bounties on minor threats to grand quests requiring the strength of entire drifter parties. Golden borders framed the board, each corner adorned with the symbols of the kingdom's greatest guilds, their insignias etched into the wood. Even though it was supposed to be the center of attraction, the place attracted less attention than other areas of the citadel. In fact, there was a dark atmosphere when one drew closer to that area. Just beyond the notice board, several reception desks were manned by clerks dressed in fine white shirts tucked into their pants. As Northern and Shin approached one of the tables, the young, brimming lady behind it greeted them, a vibrant smile plastered on her face. "Welcome to Therion. Would you like to register as a drifter here? Or are you already registered in another branch? You can show us your identification card." Northern responded this time. "No, we have come to place a request." The lady was slightly taken aback, but she quickly fixed her expression and said to Northern with a pleasing smile, "Okay, so what request would you like to place, sir?" Northern leaned on the reception table and said to her, his eyes darkly glued to hers, "I am looking for an elf." Immediately he said the word, the lady's expression changed, becoming very grim. Even Shin was shocked. He didn't expect that Northern was going to do that. "Tell me, elf lady, what the hell are these many of you all doing on Earth?" Chapter 502, Therion Part 2.
Not Herrn Lied.
The reason why he had said he was going to go and place a request wasn't entirely a lie. It made a lot of sense and was a reasonable thing to do. What was a lie, however, was the fact that he didn't tell Shin that they'd be moving right under the nose of the people they were looking for. Because from the moment he saw the past and future chaos of the Citadel, he saw something that marveled him. Several people with long, pointed ears at war with forces of the government, desperately fighting to protect their lives. Northern at that moment knew something was definitely not right. Why was there such an enormous number of elves who should be in the underworld in their own world? And moreover, what was the deal with their war with the government? He didn't concern himself with that part of what he saw. However, what he wanted to know was what they were all doing in Trael, and if the disappearance of his mother was in any way related to them. Hence, he needed to go there to confirm with his own eyes. Since Chaos Eyes could now see the soul of a person, he was darn sure that their disguise couldn't deceive his eyes. And as he suspected right from the gate. Profile. Name, Henral Thistledine. True name, The Heavy Leaf. Attributes, Way of the Wind. Soul rank, Vagrant. Soul core saturation. Middle. Talent, Light of Stone. Talent class, C. Talent ability, Heavy Defense. Strike of Thunder. Unleash. Profile. Name, Semeldine Stalt. True name, Lost to the Soil. Attributes, Way of the Wind. Soul rank, Vagrant. Soul core saturation, low. Talent, Tides of Sand. Talent class, D. Talent ability, Sandman, Sandcastle, Sand Totem. Northern had first thought about why the attribute Way of the Wind was the same in both of them. He didn't know it was possible for two different people to have the same attributes. Aside from that, the essence of their soul was pretty strange to him. Northern for a while now had been used to seeing the essence of human souls. And since Chaos Eyes became even more proficient, he had been able to see it at a level far greater than before. When Northern sets his eyes upon a human, what he sees is a shimmering vortex of energy, ever shifting and pulsing with life. The core of the soul, which he believes to be where the talent is inlaid, burns brightly like a small, luminous star. Surrounding this soul core is a complex web of radiant threads, interwoven like intricate circuits. These soul strands represent a person's memories, experiences, and connections. They tangle and stretch, occasionally fraying or pulsing in response to recent trauma or intense emotions. Every person's soul has a unique frequency, a resonance that hums through these strands, different in tone and depth, some melodious, others discordant. And in those melodies, Northern had been able to discover a common flow in all humans. In these ones, however, it was nothing like he had ever heard. Moreover, they were literally glowing with essence. The essence that flowed around their body, essentially controlled by their cores, was more bountiful in amount than any human he had ever come across. And everything about the essence of their soul was screaming, "We are not humans." Northern didn't want to be rash still, so he went on. Upon entering the Citadel reception, he took careful observation of every single person inside. Then, to his shock, all the workers and workers alone had the same soul frequency. Moreover, they all had the same attribute, Way of the Wind, which caused Northern to remember Cal. Cal was the elf he had met and killed in Sura's Rift, and he also had the attribute, Way of the Wind. Northern had thought it was a speed attribute, but standing at the entrance like this and watching all the workers, bartenders, and attendants of the Therian Citadel possess the exact same attribute made him realize a possibility. Perhaps this was an attribute intrinsic to a certain race. If that was true, that would mean every single worker in this place was an elf. Northern had expected it, but not to this magnitude. The most he had thought of was the creator of Therian being an elf and no one knowing about it. But to think the entire Therian were elves? No. Something had to be going on. Suppressing his rage, Northern marched forward. Finally, he stopped in front of a lady's reception desk. The lady behind the table welcomed him with a smile. "Welcome to Therian. Would you like to register as a drifter here? Or are you already registered in another branch? You can show us your identification card." Northern interposed before Shin could speak. "No, we have come to place a request." The lady was immediately taken aback by surprise. Except for the usual quota of bounty requests that come from the government, it had been ages since anyone had wanted to place a request. Moreover, there was a suppressed, sinister air around this man. She couldn't put her finger on it, but meeting his eyes once had made her blood run cold, and she was honestly trying to avoid eye contact. But she had a job to do. She gathered her insides and met Northern's eyes with a smile that squeezed her eyes, so she could avert her gaze at least a little bit. "Okay, so what request would you like to place, sir?" The rage that he was suppressing suddenly became harder and harder to keep bottled in. Northern leaned towards the lady with a sinister glare. "I am looking for an elf." His choice of words was intentional, and all he had wanted to do was observe her reaction. Upon hearing him, Shin almost freaked out, but before he could raise his voice to reach Northern, he saw how grim the lady's expression became. He felt chills run down his spine. Bingo! It was just the reaction he was looking for. Undoubtedly, the lady was an elf. Chapter 503, Therian Part 3. "Tell me, elf lady, what the hell are these many of you all doing on Earth?" In that moment, everything seemed to go blank. The air suddenly felt too thick to breathe, each inhale shallow and panicked as if the very oxygen was betraying her. Every creak of the floor, every distant murmur, sent her heart into a violent staccato, hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her hands, crossed upon each other right below her abdomen, trembled. She pressed them together, trying to steady herself, trying to convince her body to be still. As she heard those words, in that moment, there was nothing but fear, raw, suffocating fear. Everything she had been working so hard for, they had been working so hard for, was going to come crashing down because of some strange, ominous young child. No, she was not going to have it. Slap. How dare you insult me? Guard. Get this underage scoundrel out of here. Northern, who had just received a slap on the face with how close he had leaned in, froze, shocked and short of words. Immediately, people threw glances at their area. The guards also looked around their area and were coming closer. A dark grin parted Northern's lips. I see. That's how you want to play. He grinned even harder into the lady's face as he responded with a very audible voice. You shameless elf lady. Aren't you the one that keeps trying to seduce a 16-year-old? I'm not even legal yet. You should drown yourself in a river of shame, you cougar. Northern expected two kinds of gazes. The first kind was going to turn the embarrassment back on the lady. The crowd might not believe that he did nothing to the girl, but they would also be disgusted that the girl was seducing a child who was not yet fully grown. And the second part of the crowd, the workers. He had intentionally added elf lady there for a reason. Without any waste of time, the guards at the door came towards them and grabbed all three of them, dragging them outside and eventually out of the gate. Before long, the atmosphere of the citadel had returned to the usual. People muttered here and there, but the air of enjoyment continued. The workers, however, all had a weary and worn-out expression on their faces. Northern dusted the best piece of mundane clothing he had worn in months as he stood up from the ground. After finishing, he turned to meet Shin's furious gaze. What exactly just happened there? Northern looked at him and shrugged. I don't know. I tried busting their cover. Shin held his head together, trying his best to keep it together. North, you have been behaving very weirdly since you came back from the Dark Continent. But I have intentionally not taken anything up with you, because I believe 18 months in whatever hell that place was must have had a lot of impact on you. But boy, any more and I think I might start to swell to the point of bursting. Do you understand the importance of what we are trying to do? Northern looked at his father with a blank face. He looked at the two guards who stood like statues still. Then he sighed and turned away. I'm hungry. Ryan raised his hand slightly up too. Me too. Let's go get something to eat then. I want to have that bread from this morning again. Yeah, it was actually amazing. Dude, we should totally get that. Their voices grew distant from Shin, who stood with a red-hot forehead, glaring at Northern as he trekked forward nonchalantly with Ryan. He took a deep breath in and expelled it heavily before briskly moving towards them. Northern made no mention of anything. They found a good tavern, where they went ahead to eat breakfast. Since they had little change left, Shin opted for minimal food, giving them fresh bread and honey tea, along with tenderized sofer meat. The sofer meat could be compared to lamb meat back on Earth. There were other more expensive dishes, but it was the best choice for commoners who wanted to save their money. Aside from the fact that it was tasty and enjoyable to eat, the meat also had its nutritional benefits. But Northern was more concerned with how tasty it was to eat. Apparently, it's a meat cultivated from a monster that had been tamed over the years to become a farm animal. After the breakfast, Northern decided that he was going to gather more information about the Therian Citadel and insisted that he wanted to go alone. And they decided that they would meet at the Sleep-End Tidauberts. Since things have gone south, it seemed that they would have to spend another night there. Shin silently wondered what exactly Northern was up to and how their movement was going to be from this place. The more he looked at Northern's actions, the more he felt like the boy had something in mind but was not communicating it to anyone. He wished Northern would at least tell him his plan, but he decided not to stubbornly insist but instead trust his son. To be honest, I will call them a savior. Yes, really, the Citadel headmaster does not infringe absurd taxes on us, and he protects us from rifts and field monsters. Since Therian came around, South Drywall has begun to enjoy the kind of abundance of resources that kingdoms have and refuse to share. My friend here is right. At this point, I don't think anyone would mind should they decide to rename the city Therian and become a nation. Northern raised a brow. A nation ruled by elves. I don't know if that's a really good call. Don't look like that. It's because you are a traveler that you don't know. The headmaster there is really nice and dependable. I hear he is an ascendant even. Very soon, he would become a paragon. Just an ascendant? Northern was shocked. To be honest, he had expected more, since they were elves and from everyone he spoke of. These elves seemed to have gathered mountainous respect from the people. Of course, no one except him knew of their elven origins. What do you mean just ascendant? Look at this kid. TSK. You think being an ascendant is a small feat. Let's go. This guy obviously does not know what he is saying. Northern watched, deadpanned, as the two civilians he was talking to marched away with irritation and disgust at his words. I didn't mean to do that, he muttered, then sighed, looked up and around before walking forward. When he got to the mouth of a slightly dark alley against the ebbing evening, Northern cut into the alley and continued to walk forward. He got to the closed end of the alley and exhaled tiredly. You've been following me since morning? Aren't you guys tired? The men cloaked in shadowy apparel trembled in shock and took a step back, their faces contorted with terror, pearls of sweat washing down the revealed part of their masks. Chapter 504. The Ghost Walkers. No way. It was not possible. There was no way the kid knew they were following him. But the fact that he deliberately went to a closed alley before calling them out pointed to the fact that he knew they were following him. But it was impossible. There was no way he would know. Ghost Walkers. They were the elite forces of Therion, birthed in darkness, and since the day they learned to walk, they were trained with a special heritage footwork called Lightstep. As fast as light, as silent as a feather. This was the essential message of the heritage. Each of them from a young age rigorously trained to better their understanding of this heritage. And all of them had achieved true comprehension, in fact managing to level up the heritage to level 5. Even Northern, after all his understanding of the chaos art, had still been stuck in level 3. Bringing a heritage to level 5 was an incredible feat, one that could have only been achieved by such meticulous determination and training. In addition to that, they knew of their origins. They were not humans, and compared to humans, they were much more adept at totally erasing their presence. It was a simple trick of just ceasing activity in their soul core. All this coalesced together, it was impossible for a human, much less a kid, to notice their presence. Right? It has to be luck, or maybe guesswork, perhaps a function of his talent, the leader of the elite forces thought to himself. Even if it was a talent ability, it was just impossible to notice their presence. Because the Ghost Walkers, as the name implied, were basically ghosts. They moved as if they were non-existent. Even down to their faces, they have never been seen. Their voices have never been heard. No one has ever actually seen them operate. No one even knows of their existence except the headmaster himself. So it was just so impossible and unbelievable that this kid would notice them. No, it stained their reputation and denied the essence of their existence. The leader nodded his head, vehemently refusing to believe that Northern had indeed sensed their presence all along. Northern's voice resounded in the alley, causing him to flinch. What? Aren't you guys going to take me away? I've been waiting for a while now, you know? What? The leader, crouched upon the wall of the alley, stared down with a tsunami of confusion crashing all over his face. Should he take him? Should he not take him? It's true that their objective was to kidnap the kid that caused a ruckus in the Citadel earlier in the morning. And the only reason why the headmaster had given them the task was because of the sensitivity of the matter at hand. When he first got the headmaster's call, he had been surprised and shocked because this was the first time in 3 years that man was calling him. However, when he had heard that the said kid used the word elf, even he couldn't deny the urgency of the situation at hand. However, being here like this with this kid, who for some strange reason seemed to have been expecting them, left him utterly blank. Never had he been confused on a mission before. His comrade landed beside him with the grace of the wind, then whispered, "What do we do, boss? This guy seems suspicious. Too suspicious." He frowned back, almost responding out of frustration. "You think I don't know that?" "Sorry, boss." The lackey bowed and went silent, focusing a scowl on Northern, who was looking up at them with a grin. The boss of the Ghostwalkers scratched his head in frustration and gave an order. The mission is to bring him in alive, and that's exactly what we will do. Knock him out. As the last word went out, the Ghostwalker beside him glowed like dark wind, blurring as he landed with a swift motion of his hand across Northern's neck. However, his eyes widened as he felt his hand cut through empty space, slightly parting the thick wind of the corner. "Where are you looking?" With even wider eyes, the Ghostwalker made a swift turn, lunging to grab Northern only to grab the air. Where did he go? His mind bugged. You know, when I said I will go with you, I didn't mean be disrespectful and knock me out. The leader suddenly heard a hoarse voice behind his neck, the same voice that had been resounding in the alley. He belatedly realized who it was, staggering in a frenzy, causing him to lose his footing on the wall. As he fell down the wall, his body automatically twisted, landing him sturdily on his feet. "Oh, nice reflex," Northern exclaimed with a true look of surprise on his face. Immediately they saw their leader moved. All the Ghostwalkers instantaneously moved, covering the sky with a shroud of thick darkness, and descending upon Northern. He raised his index finger slightly and pointed down. Following the flow of his finger, there was a sudden drop in gravity, forcefully smashing all of them into the ground at the same time. Northern folded his hand, earnestly deliberating. What should I call this one almighty push? Nah, that's lame. Almighty fall? Gravity fall? Northern's finger fall. He shook his head rigorously. No, no, no. How about I just create a 5-finger rule, using each finger to govern the little of what I can tweak in nature's law? He grinned in satisfaction. Yes, that sounds way better. I guess my index finger will be the gravity finger. He finally focused on his supposed kidnappers who were still being pressed down by an unknown force. They tried to force their way up, but the force only got heavier, as if a mountain had been placed on their backs. Some of them coughed blood as they tried too hard to resist the force pressing them to the ground. Their leader stared in paralyzing confusion, his eyes so widened that they looked like they would fall off their sockets. Northern, as he saw the look on the leader's face, smiled widely, however dark. There, Elufu. I like the look on your face." His tone rang out with a sinister chuckle. Chapter 505. Peak Confusion. Gravity. The leader of the Ghostwalkers might not have been able to comprehend what manner of existence they'd been asked to come and kidnap. But what just happened had given him an idea. Talents and talent abilities are diverse, and a limitation cannot be placed on what they can do and undo. Amongst this diversity exists a certain kind of talent that was heavily feared and respected, even sought out by high-profile citadels. These talents branch in and out of every concept and law of nature, bending and unbending them as fit is seen. Some were considered mundane in comparison with others, but none of their growth potential could be underestimated. And the most amazing thing was that these sorts of talents were always classified as SSS or EX. Finally, the leader of the Ghostwalkers felt like he was beginning to understand the possibility of Northern discovering their presence, although it still didn't make any sense. But there was a slight chance that all of this is explainable if he happens to have an SSS or EX class talent. I need to take him to the headmaster at all cost. Northern gracefully landed on the ground, then folded his index finger. All the while he had been holding it out to keep the gravity. The moment he folded the finger, all of them plopped on their backs, coughing and gasping furiously. Northern observed them pitifully for a second, then turned his face to the leader whom he was standing in front of. "You are the leader, aren't you?" he asked rhetorically. "I can tell by that astounding control of your essence. It has a refined flow that others do not." Northern spoke, staring directly into the man's belly. Struck by a mind-numbing fear, the leader of the Ghostwalkers stood still. He wanted to move, but his legs felt too heavy. As Northern stared into his eyes, he suddenly felt like his entire body was being drowned by the crepuscular sky. "Who are you?" "That's unimportant for mob characters like you." He retrieved his glare, eyes settling with a cold indifference. Then he added, "Your headmaster asked you to come kidnap me, didn't he?" The leader of the assassins narrowed his eyes at once. He knew. Don't be too surprised. I didn't particularly think you all would let me walk freely after uttering the word elf, which only a very few people, I assume, know. He nodded with a freeing smile. It's fine. Let's go. I needed to meet the man behind Therion's existence. I need to place a request. The poor leader was so confused. Was taking this strange boy the right option? Or should he kill him here? With all my cards, it should be possible. He might have a high-class talent, but in the end, he's probably a drifter or at most a nomad. If I unveil all my cards, I should be able to permanently dispose of him. See, I smell bloodthirst from you. If I return the favor, you could die. I don't intend to harm you people or jeopardize your existence, at least for now. Just take me to your damned headmaster before I change my mind. Northern's patience was running thin. I understand that they are scared and confused, but don't they train people here to have a formidable and calculative mind? He glanced at them with a chagrined look on his face. Well, it's not something anyone learns in a peaceful continent like this one. Finally, the leader's voice rang out. Fine, I will take you with me. Good decision, now lead the way. You might not be able to match our pace or see us, so we need. Don't lie to me. Northern interrupted rudely and emphasized again in a serious tone. I said stay away. The leader flinched a little at the sound of Northern's command. Frustratingly, even he could not figure out why he was so intimidated by this obviously young boy before him. He has an astounding talent. I'm sure I'm just surprised. He reasoned in his mind as he signaled to the recovering others. Suddenly, all of them blurred swiftly into the air like black shadows fleeing from light. Magnificent! The amazing part of it was that what they were using as movement was not even talents. If not, he would have gotten a notification asking him to copy. Northern smiled in admiration before dissipating from the surroundings. As the leader, pelted in dark shadows, blitzed across roofs, he glanced back in regret. Why'd he have to be so stubborn? I knew he couldn't catch up. These cocky kids with high-class talents. What are you looking back at? The voice startled him so much that he ran into his own leg and tumbled over his head, sliding down the slated roof. Fortunately, his reflex saved him again. He sprang up with an unnatural momentum, finding ground on the slant roof and bursting forward with a turbo-like velocity. Northern looked at him in amazement and thought, his reflex really is amazing. This has to be a trick. There has to be a trick he is using. He can't be as fast as we are. What the hell is he doing? Why is he easily matching our pace? The poor leader felt these thoughts were going to rip his sanity apart. Eventually, they landed on the compound of Therion. The beautiful environment was now shrouded in pitch darkness, with soft orange illuminations from ornamental lamps. They casually walked with Northern in between them, entering the castle-like tower. But unlike in the morning, they didn't enter through the main door. They went across the yard where a door that wasn't there a second ago outlined itself and permitted them entry. The passageway was dark, very dark, even for them, but not for Northern. Did they use an item that swallows every slight trace of light to darken the pathway? That was what it looked like to him because the darkness they threaded in felt so unnatural. Finally, after a few steps, they stopped and the leader said, "You will meet a door, exactly 10 steps forward." Oh? Did they move through the darkness by counting their steps? That's quite sad. He waved his hand dismissively. It's fine. I can see the black metal door beyond this bridge. The leader watched Northern walk towards the arching bridge with a severely puzzled expression. Even till now, he still couldn't tell if he had made the right call or committed a grave mistake that would lead to the downfall of his race. Chapter 506. Sucks to be unmanly. As Northern entered the door, a flood of light washed into his view, causing him to squint his eyes for a moment. As he opened his eyes almost immediately afterwards, the scene of a grand library bathed in the soft, warm glow of amber light filtering from large, hanging orbs, unfolded before them. Towering bookshelves stretched upwards to the high arched ceilings, their dark wooden frames etched with ornate designs, giving the place an air of timeless knowledge and history. The shelves were packed with ancient omnibuses, colorful spines of varying ages, and some loose books scattered across the plush red carpet that runs the length of the room, adding a touch of comfort and luxury. Small alcoves featured well-worn wooden tables and chairs, giving the space a lived-in, scholarly atmosphere. A few open books lay abandoned on the tables, their pages ruffled, while other papers and scrolls were stacked in neat piles, showing the recent presence of who might have studied there. In the center of the library, a large, elegant desk of dark oak rested, set beneath a chandelier of glowing crystals. The desk was cluttered with parchment, ink bottles, and quills, and at its center sat an intricately crafted brass lamp that illuminated the surface with a soft golden light. To the side, a set of comfortable leather chairs and a low table invited deep discussions or private contemplation. Behind the desk, a tall man, exuding an aura of authority and mystique, sat. His eyes blazed with an intense violet glow, radiating an otherworldly energy that seemed to pulse with restrained power. His sharp, chiseled features were accentuated by his slicked-back dark hair, which perfectly complemented his aristocratic demeanor. Adorned in a sleek black suit, his attire was impeccably tailored, with a tie holding a gem of deep amethyst, shimmering with almost the same energy that emanated from his eyes. The man crossed his legs and made his debut statement. "Welcome to Therion, young man. Do you find this place fascinating?" Northern almost felt intimidated as the man's voice cut through the perfect silence in the room, velvet-like, yet carrying the force of 1,000 storms behind it. A voice that could both comfort and threaten, depending on the situation. He wouldn't need to yell to make himself heard. Even his whispers would demand attention. We elves have an insatiable thirst for knowledge, and such thirst has helped us across ages. Northern flinched as the man's voice appeared to his left. He was removing a book from its shelves. He turned to Northern with a stern look on his face, further accentuated by his perfect masculine jawline. His eyes asserting dominance and control over the atmosphere. "The things we do for a reason. Our very existence is backed by knowledge, which has carved an indomitable path for my kind. Meticulously, along with benign precision, we have shaped the course of our history. Our actions, beliefs, and resolve are guided by a higher purpose, a grand design that transcends the limited understanding of mere mortals." Northern watched in silence as the man continued to read. "Each step we take, each decision we make, is a calculated move in a cosmic game of chess. We are the guardians of a truth too vast for most to comprehend, the shepherds of a future yet to unfold. Our methods may seem harsh, our choices difficult, but they are necessary for the greater good. In this intricate dance of fate and free will, we stand as the arbiters of balance, ensuring that the scales of existence remain true. So when you question our motives, remember this: we bear the weight of eons on our shoulders, and the responsibility of shaping the destiny of all." He smiled a little and raised the book in his hand. The Fallen Suns was a great piece by Altesgmar Schneids. "Do you have a predilection for books?" Northern froze for a second, dumbfounded. "Don't tell me." All the while, he was quoting the book in his hands, verbatim. "It's a great piece. I would love to read it again tonight. But first, let's talk." His smile suddenly eased all the pent-up pressure in the silent atmosphere, as he pointed for Northern to go towards the chair opposite his table. There was nothing stopping him from sitting, and although he couldn't quite get the overall strength of the person standing before him because he didn't want to alert him in any way, he was still confident in his ability to, if not kill this man, then seriously wound him, a couple of broken ribs and severed limbs, perhaps. With a confident stride, Northern made his way to the chair and eventually sat down, comfortably leaning on the armrest. The man observed him for a few seconds and then joined him, settling into the chair opposite Northern. "So, do you want to start?" "He has a very arrogant and proud air, but he's actually nice." Northern looked at him with hidden disdain. The man, regardless, waited for Northern's response. With a padded shoulder, Northern shrugged, sternly facing him and clearing his throat before speaking. "Well, I guess I can go first. Northern's voice resounded with an unusual, unpracticed, flawed, and pretentious thickness. He cleared his throat again, upon finding out how stressful it would be to continue in that tone. Sucks to not have a manly tone, honestly. You are probably most curious about how I know that you guys are elves. The man kept a straight, unfazed gaze glued to Northern, who continued, oblivious of the subtle pressure the man exerted. Well, I've had a few encounters, and I have an ability that lets me see the one thing you all have in common. The way of the wind is some kind of elven blessing, isn't it? The man raised his brows. Oh, I understand. His baritone vibrated out. Well, aside from that, what has led me to this point is the fact that I am looking for my mother, who happens to be an elf who was kidnapped some months ago. Her name is Aisha. All I just need is for you to find her for me, and I won't concern myself in your matters. For the first time since meeting him, the headmaster's expression changed, contorting with immense and terrific distress. What? You mean the Lady Aisha was kidnapped? Chapter 507, Fair Trade. Northern, confused as to what the sudden change in the man's attitude was for, responded with a slight stutter. Yes, the Lady Aisha. He had a slight frown, birthed from the bowels of confusion, etched on his brows. Why the sudden change in expression? Northern mused, of course, keeping a calm and indifferent look, expressing only slight shock. Did you say she is your mother? Northern nodded. Yes, she is my mother. He silently observed the man, who seemed to be thrown out of his skin for some reason. And all this started the moment Aisha was mentioned. Northern waited till the headmaster looked like he was ready to talk. Then he said, I suppose you are familiar, preferably acquainted with my mother. The man slowly regained his composure, closing his eyes and breathing in silence even after Northern had said his piece. He raised a hand to interrupt Northern, who was about to make another statement, and let loose a heavy sigh. Several things are not adding up. First of all, how is Aisha a mother? Unless it's the seed of an elf, she's a royalty, designated to never carry a blooded being except if it's of royal blood. Northern's expression grew grim. And if they do? The man touched his head, exhaling to relieve himself of a seemingly heavy headache. His gaze rode back to Northern. Aisha has blonde hair and golden eyes. You look nothing like her. You are her adopted child, I presume. Northern folded his arms and frowned. So, you wouldn't answer the question? Should that be your concern right now? The man washed his face with his palms. Despite this, he still looked strangled by worry. Northern could not piece the puzzle as of yet. All he did was stare in blatant curiosity. Why did this young man seem so shaken by Aisha's news? He believed he was about to know in the next few seconds. Since it seems that you are in need as much as I am, why don't we make this a trade? Of course. A small smile left Northern's face, prompting his response after a short silence. I guess that makes a lot of sense. How about you start by telling me why you know my mother? And you will tell me what you know about us elves, and how you know about the underworld. Northern contorted his lips with disgust. No way. I'm not about to trade you my most valuable information for that. Then you'd better choose an equally valuable question. The man's gaze was resolute, like an impregnable fortress of heavy metal. Northern felt like no kind of underhanded tactics would break into his fortress. He wasn't one to employ such tactics, but as much as he hated to admit it, he felt outwitted by the person sitting before him. He was an elf to begin with, and much definitely on the platter of information he had the upper hand. In a way, Northern could consider himself a rude kid with guts. I'm sure that's how he sees me. Not that I care or anything. I don't need his acknowledgement. I just need him to help me find my mother. If he was going to trade the one piece of information he had as leverage, then it better be for something they were here for in the first place. He exhaled and looked directly into the eyes of the headmaster, his reflecting a deep, unending well of darkness. I need you to tell me who could have kidnapped my mother and where they are right now. The headmaster evaluated Northern with keen eyes, his expression deadpan and darkly focused, making the quiet air somehow heavy. If there was a third subject in the scene, any less weaker in resolve than these two, they would have choked to death under the fierce air of resolution. The headmaster sighed. While it seems obvious that you are a kid, your eyes carry a deep and bothersome experience. I wonder, is that the reason for the astute sharpness I feel around you? Or is there more to your being than I am seeing right now? Is that a question? Would you like to add another slot? No. It's barely been 10 minutes since meeting you, and I feel like my life is beginning to turn around for the worse. Thank you for the compliment. The man stared at him with an expression of helplessness. Afterwards, he heaved a sigh and spoke. I can't be too sure, but if your mother was kidnapped, the only people that would care enough to do so are the cults of Vitten. A cult? Northern's voice was tinged with derision. For your sake, do not underestimate them. These ones are nothing like the human cults dedicated to worshipping constellations with a twisted belief that they shall one day descend into the world. I see you're not a religious fellow. Both the established and unestablished cults have a belief system that does not hold water when you think about it. He paused for a moment. Am I seriously about to discuss religion with a kid? Then he sighed and casually returned to his former statement. The followers of Vitten are a bunch of insanely strong religious elves that believe that royalties exist for the sole purpose of carrying fragments of Vitten's blood until it all comes together and he is reborn again. Northern quickly inputted. And I presume all of this is in the underworld. The headmaster looked at him, not uttering a word, and just continued casually. However, they may have leaked into the upper world. Northern folded his arms as he leaned back. So, these people are pursuing my mother? For what and why? As for where they are right now, I am not entirely sure, but I will put my resources into finding out. Since I will be going out of my way to do that, you will be adding one on your slot. Northern clicked his tongue in irritation. Cunning as hell. The man relaxed forward, leaning his elbows on his thighs as he crossed his fingers and rested his chin on them. So, your turn, my friend. How do you know about us and the underworld? Chapter 508, Young Master. Northern was silent for a couple of seconds. In those couple of seconds, the headmaster found it difficult to read his thoughts through his face. A deadpan expression stifled his features. Then he eventually opened his mouth and started. Like I said before, I had an encounter with an elf from the underworld. But he had called it a name. What's the name again? Strenot. Yes, Northern exclaimed with widened eyes. That one. If you know it, then you really must be from the underworld. He paused for a moment, observing the man with a strange glitter in his eyes. I wonder how you people were able to cross both worlds. So what else do you know about us and the underworld? About you? I don't really know anything. And about your world, I only know things that are concerning Tyrant and Origins. The man suddenly shuddered. Northern frowned. You look like you're in your 30s. If not, I'd think you're getting old with the way you've been shivering every now and then when I say something. The headmaster bowed his face into his palm for the next few seconds. He couldn't have helped it in any way. How could he not shudder when Northern had casually mentioned a word that no one in or out of the underworld would dare to utter? It seems you don't know much about us indeed, and what you claim to know something about, I would really be glad if you say nothing about it to me. And I'm also not going to ask you how a kid like you knows something like this. He removed his palm and looked into Northern's eyes as he continued. What I am going to ask you, however, is, what rift did you encounter this elf in? What was the rank of the rift? And how exactly did you survive? Northern lingered for a while and shrugged. I think Tier V, and my partner at the time wiped off all the monsters. I also had to kill this elf guy. He was a real snake. I hate snakes. Afterwards, I went on to kill the servant of tyrants who had messed up with the rift. But he managed to run away, which still leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I want nothing more than to kill that bastard. The man stared grimly for a few seconds, until Northern stared back and uttered, What? It's just difficult to believe that you were in a Tier V rift and actually lived. If that is actually possible, your team must have worked really hard to carry each other. most especially the masters and savants there. Northern furrowed his brows. Did you not hear the part where I said my partner and I? The man raised his chin, looking down on Northern with disbelief. What? Are you trying to say two of you survived and defeated a Tier V rift? What? I alone have survived and defeated a Tier 4 rift. When all odds are stacked against you but you have to survive, you just have to survive either way. The man froze for a few seconds, his eyes blinking. He doesn't look like he is lying. Besides, since he came, there's been this cold air around him. His brows came together, slightly tense as he asked, I'm sorry, is it possible that I check your soul rank? Northern shrugged. Feel free. The man grabbed an orb that was randomly laying on his desk. Since many people did not have the scout ability like Ellis did, they always used a measuring instrument or an estimate of the person's essence they perceived to determine their soul rank. This orb was just one of the many instruments that were used to measure soul rank. Please place your hand on this. You don't need to pour your essence into it. It reacts to your soul temperature. Soul temperature? Northern mused interestingly as he placed his hand on the orb. The man waited for a few beats, and then the colorless, transparent orb slowly began to transition, and finally settled into a deep violet color. His eyes widened as they came up to meet Northern's. His mouth trembled as he unbelievably asked, I'm sorry, what is your age? Northern thought about it for a while. He had missed when his second birthday was and had casually been saying 16 but decided to really think if he was actually 16 before responding. 16, I think. I was stuck in a place where I didn't have the luxury to follow the days of the week and months. The man's face went as pale as white paper, his mouth almost falling. His brows were slightly furrowed and trembling. A master at 16. This is impossible. It has never been heard of. He gripped the arms of his chair. I'm sorry. Did you say you were... Are you from the Dark Continent? Northern folded his arms and closed his eyes as he responded, Damn right I am. I did hear from a reliable source that the students who were sent to the Dark Continent were back. But I didn't pay attention to it. Northern silently nodded. Well, I guess that's that. So you promised to help me, right? Then I will be the one left to pay you. The man stared absent-mindedly before suddenly stopping Northern, who was about to stand up. I'm sorry. He extended his hand out with a baritone. Northern raised his brow, standing up regardless, but on his feet, inquired, What is it? I need you. You're one slot. Can you become a member of my citadel? Until a certain period, if you don't want to stay afterwards, then there's no problem. Northern's lips curled up. You seem quite in need of me. Can I add a few conditions? The man sighed, looking away for a moment, his face realizing he had lost his cool because Northern was a master. Northern spoke, raising a finger. You will take two others, a friend and my father. You'll provide accommodation for us, and also all our meals will be on you. You will also be paying us. The man sighed. I'm willing to do that much for a master. That sigh made Northern feel like he had been scammed. These other two, do you know what their soul ranks are? They are both masters. Northern answered disinterestedly, still pondering if he could add more. I'll talk about the price he'll be paying us then. Meanwhile, the man stared, eyes widened. He held Northern's hand with so much love in his eyes. Please, tell them we will pay them too. Chapter 509. The Age of Gems. Northern was quite proud of himself. Not only had he been able to get a lead on the issue of his mother, he had landed himself a temporary job at one of the most prestigious citadels in the whole of the Central Plains. I'm sure father is going to be shocked. The headmaster, Thalen, had insisted that he should make himself comfortable in the citadel, while he sent escorts to bring his father and Ryan. Northern liked the idea. He was tired from walking around to begin with, so he easily consented to it. He retreated to dinner, after which he was shown to a luxurious bedroom. The last time Northern could remember being anywhere this good or even close was in the Kingdom of the Red Mine. Although his memory from that time was vague, he still remembered living alone in a large, aged room of luxury. That can be considered as something too. He leaned on the bed, feeling his entire body relax soothingly on the bouncy foam of the mattress. He spread his arms, staring into the intricately designed ceiling and the chained chandelier with a unique golden light cascading down the center of the room. The entire space reeked of luxury. The table and chair sitting towards a corner made him suddenly want to write. The gentle breeze that blew in from the window in collision with the king-sized bed begged him to sleep. He managed to resist for a little while, thinking back on his conversation with Thalen. So many things were unclear, but because Thalen was unwilling to divulge all the information for free, he had to be careful. He didn't want to propose more slots and give Thalen the opportunity to start poking into him any more than necessary. What bothered him immediately now, however, even as his eyes drooped, was the reason why Thalen needed masters. Northern didn't think it was an incredible feat to be a master at such a young age. In fact, with all the potential given to him, he thought he was pretty slow in soul progression. He almost at a time felt pressured, eventually only managing to do what he could do at the time. With so much to spend talent fragments on, there was a sorrowful limit to how fast his soul growth could be. But it has all worked out in the end, hasn't it? Those were the last words that lingered on his mind as his consciousness drifted into a peaceful slumber. The morning came like a flash. At the same time it felt so far, but the thing about this sleep that Northern did not think he was in a state of expectancy. While he was deeply asleep, he felt sufficiently aware of his surroundings such that he knew when Shin came around later that night. He was also aware of some immensely strong presence that entered and left the citadel that night. However, he was so deep into the warmth of sleep that he felt almost numb to respond in any way, and severely lazy towards any condition that might have required his attention. His mind was on a severe rest mode until even the late morning, where he slowly revealed the deep and dark yet astounding beauty of his azure eyes, and slowly propped himself up, staying like that for a couple of seconds, almost as if he was booting his system. Then he stood up, his feet gently placing in front of each other as he meandered towards the window, then dropped his hand on the frame of the window, leaning on it. He closed his eyes as the warmth of the daylight star slapped his pale face. A smile curved on his face as the feeling warmed his skin and in a strange way refreshed his entire being. He didn't think he had felt this good since coming to the Central Plains. Right? I still have to find my mother. The light in his expression slowly faded, replaced by a flame of resolve burning in the depth of his already deep gaze. Just then Northern turned, sat on the window and counted 3, 2, 1 bam. Knock knock. Simultaneously, a knock gently beat the door, after which the knocker opened and allowed himself in. It was Thalen, and he looked very pale. Are you fine? You looked like you've been frozen in ice the entire night. The headmaster tried his best to regulate his breathing, resting on the wall as he breathed in and out repetitively. He was a young man with a stern and powerful gaze just yesterday. However, right now, he looked like all that vigor and air of authority had been overthrown by demonic stress and unbridled shock. As if he had suddenly aged 1,000 years in one night. Northern patiently waited for Thalen to gain himself. The man straightened his back, adjusting his suit. A semblance of his youthful vigor managed to return to his face. Why didn't you tell me? Thalen demanded, glaring daggers into Northern's eyes. Tell you what? Northern cocked his head, his eyes wide and unfocused. That you and your friend both have SSS-class talents. Northern raised a brow. Me and my friend have SSS-class talents? He blinked severely. Yes, the Ghostwalkers saw you control gravity. You are a gem, a real gem, and your friend has an insane control over ice. Both of you are gems. Citadels and clans would war to have you on their sides. Ah, I see. Northern stared at the man for a while, finally understanding. His eyes focused on the ceiling as he thought aloud. But if the two of us can cause war with citadels and clans, then I can only wonder how much the tide of the Central Plains is about to change. Thalen, carefully paying attention, stared with squinted eyes. What do you mean? Northern brought his eyes to meet Thalen's and said in a boring tone. I am not the only one that made it back from the Dark Continent, and although both of us are kind of the peak of them all, there are several amazing guys. You should probably be trying to recruit them. Thalen's eyes widened greedily. What? Please help me. A malicious grin spread itself on Northern's lips. Oh yes, I will help you. For a great price, you see. His eyes glinted with a dangerous and crazy light accentuating his sinister grin. Chapter 510 Rotten Ruffsburg. For the next few days, Northern worked closely with Thalen to investigate and locate several other drifters that had made it to the Central Plains with them. This was what gave him the privilege of access to certain information. First of all was the current state of things, generally, and how the news of the return of the students had affected the continent at large. And honestly, Northern was pretty disappointed. He had expected it to be more of a big deal than Thalen's sources discovered it to be. There had been no word heard from Ruffsburg. His assistants and guards had claimed that he had ventured into solitary training to break the limitations of being a paragon and become a luminary. And it seemed it was the possibility of this news that had several sources silent, most especially the government. Thalen had described the government as an intricate web of hidden agendas, where power shifts and allegiances were never straightforward. They operated more like a vast council of influential figures than a single ruling body. Each faction had its own interests to protect, and the return of the students had become just another factor in their constant political maneuvering. The government's silent because they're waiting, Thalen had told Northern as they sat in a golden illuminated library, his table filled with scattered maps and documents. They want to see if Ruffsburg succeeds in breaking through to Luminary. If he does, they know his influence could reshape everything. If he fails, well, they'll be quick to act. Either way, they're hedging their bets. It was quite sad that the beacon that was created as a medium of control and balance for the authority of monarchs had now succumbed to such authority and propaganda play, all in the name of seizing power. I wonder if power is a poison that insidiously infects its host regardless of how true of heart they may be. Northern was suddenly made to remember Night Terror and the Kingdom of the Red Mine. He leaned back in his chair, pondering. From what he knew, he had always viewed the government as a necessary evil, an institution that managed the chaos of the continent. But Thalen's description painted a picture of something far more manipulative, far more dangerous. Then why haven't the drifters been affected by this? Northern asked, glancing over the scattered reports of drifters returning to the Central Plains. Shouldn't they be targeted or, at the very least, watched? They are, Thalen replied, folding his arms across his chest. But not in the way you'd expect. The government isn't interested in immediate action against them. They're observing, calculating, waiting for one of us to make a mistake. By mistake, you mean? Thalen frowned as he explained further. The set of organizations that the government is most wary of is the private citadels. By making a mistake, they are hoping to find an opening or to see whether or not we will involve ourselves in these matters. Of course, the government knows, if a set of drifters who are merely students were able to make it out of a monster-infected continent, then they are most likely a different generation of drifters than we have ever seen. Which is why, even though they are allowing the news to circulate, they are still using propaganda and managing to control the smoke of this situation. I see. They are making it look like they are doing their job while using backdoor methods to kill the effects? Thalen looked at Northern. Quite smart, aren't you? I'd just say I have keen eyes. Thalen leaned on the table with a slight frown on his face. I do not wish to concern myself with the government and their nonsense. Right now, we've only managed to contact 3 out of the students. All 3 look like they've got potential. He looked at Northern, who at this point was grinning smugly. I will credit you 500 credits per head. Thalen exhaled tiredly. It was nice doing business with you. Thalen looked down at the list on his table. In it was written 3 names with an inkstone and calligraphic handwriting. Ellis Ruthsworn, Helena Rexon, Erickson Weatherby. These were the 3 people that in the past 5 days had managed to give them a positive response, out of all the people they had met. Northern had felt a little bit reluctant about giving information on Helena's talent and talent abilities, because the least he wanted was encountering her in any place. But he had to make a decision between her and the money. And to be honest, she wasn't worth losing even Atali's for. Even though, seeing her name there still left a bad taste in his mouth. He was silent for a while before opening his mouth to ask a question that bothered him. Do you think Ruffsburg will become a luminary? Thalen paused what he was doing, his eyes drifting forward into the distance beyond. He exhaled and responded. To be honest, I think he will. That man is one hell of a cunning and strange man who is always up to something. I've met him once and I couldn't deny the fear of getting exposed if I kept hanging around him. So I made sure our paths don't cross. I have known him by information and rumors to be a very crafty and strong man. Moreover, the government are no fools or slouches. If the news of Ruffsburg's entry into solitary is affecting them this much, then they must be onto something, don't you think? He ended, looking into Northern's eyes with a warm smile. Northern gave a fake smile in response, his mind quickly diving out of the scenery. If Ruffsburg becomes a luminary, all our hopes will be cut short. Everyone has been brooding with the passion to kill him. If he shows his face to the world as a luminary, he will be the only luminary in the world and thus be untouchable. Besides the fact that Ruffsburg might become a continental asset, protected by all nations, citadels, and even the government, he'd gain new powers and reach much greater heights. Northern could understand the weight of this new rank because he had fought a paragon. The difference between some soul ranks is always like the sky and the earth. Just like the tremendous boost in power the moment he became a master from a nomad. Northern suspected an intense boost in power should one become a luminary. He had fought a paragon and barely lived. Although if he was to fight again, Northern felt he had a 50% chance of success. However, against a luminary? He shook his head in pity. Damn Ruffsburg, did he carefully plan all of this? Chapter 511, The Lead. Ruffsburg was very crafty and definitely knew what he was doing from the first day. He sent them to the heart of that disaster. Northern didn't want to believe he didn't actually expect them to return. So was becoming a luminary his failsafe? No, it couldn't be. It was too magnanimous to be a failsafe. It had to have been Ruffsburg's goal all along. Becoming a luminary. That would explain to a degree why he had found a way to artificially force open rifts. If he wanted to have access to stronger monsters, he'd have definitely done that. However, wasn't it dangerous? Why the need for so much power? Northern's mind automatically generated the answer following the question it posed. The more you get, the more you want? Until one got to the pinnacle, as far as they had resolve, they wouldn't stop striving to become stronger. He could relate and understand to a certain degree. Despite the emptiness that was growing in him because of the void, he still wanted to grow and become even stronger. It is a natural law for humans to become greedy and corrupted in the pursuit of power, such that they abandon morality and become consumed by darkness. Northern himself could feel the danger of such a path. A shaky breath broke out of him subtly as he tried to re-rein himself. Oh, right. Thalen's thick voice distracted him from his thoughts, causing Northern to shift his eyes to him, deadpan at first. A word came in. Indeed, there have been sightings that could be linked to the followers of Witten. Northern frowned darkly for a moment. Hope trickled into his heart at the thought that he would be opportune to save his mother, making the grimness of his expression simmer down a little. With a light raise of his brow, Northern asked, "If these followers of Witten are from the underworld, won't they be trying to go back there?" Of course they would, which is why we need to move fast, whatever the case may be. Since I don't want to be busted, I will assign a team with you. Is that okay? Northern shook his head in defiance. I don't want any team. Us three is enough. Thalen stopped inspecting the map he was leaning on and straightened up to stare into Northern's eyes. I warned you not to underestimate these people. Moreover, it hasn't even been confirmed if they are with your mother. At the very least, we know to suspect something since traces of them were found in Arcadia. This time, Northern could not suppress the grim expression. Arcadia of all places? Yes, Arcadia of all places. Thalen repeated with a concentrated gaze at Northern before averting his eyes to return to what he was doing. If one was to speak of a place where the government was more prominent, Then the first city that would come to their mind was Arcadia. Several others existed, but Arcadia held the significance of the largest democratic religion. The authority and presence of the government is quite evident in these places, with one of the important seats of the governing council overruling this place as its mayor. Except he is not in power anymore. It's been a while since I read the news after all. Either way, whoever was there was bound to be a loyal dog of the government. Causing trouble in a place like that will definitely not work to his advantage if he wanted to keep a low profile. Or is it being intimate with someone of low status? No. As much as Northern didn't want to give a damn and just burst everything, he was now more than ever more wary because now there are evidences of beings beyond mortal existence behind the events surrounding him. The one thing he doesn't want to do is let things haphazardly happen and fall beyond his control. As much as he wanted to save his mother, he wanted to also believe these followers of Witten, and particularly Witten itself, held a semblance of significance to whatever it is fate is trying to get him to do this time. And being vigilant is being able to control every single event. Who says I have to be the one doing it anyway? It was an incredible thing he had servants. Eyes sparkling with renewed hope, he looked at Thalen and said, "When do we depart for Arcadia?" Thalen raised a brow. "What are you saying? I thought you just understood the significance of this place. You can't afford to be lousy." "Don't worry, I won't. All I'm just doing is investigating this cult and the disappearance of my mother." Skepticism wallowed across Thalen's face for a moment. Eventually, he succumbed. "Fine, but I will attach a scout to you. As long as such a person is able to save themselves, I have no issue with it." "That's quite cold of you to say?" Northern did not respond and just walked out of the library, his steps barely making any sound. After Northern had stepped outside, Thalen bent over the table, glanced back, and shook his head. I don't know if he is a child or an adult in the body of a child. Sometimes, talking to him feels like a different kind of hassle. He brought back his focus to the map he was looking at and continued to intensively study them. Northern, after the first day, did not use the dark hall to go to the headmaster's library. Now that I think about it, wasn't that so dramatic? I've not even seen them since then. As their name implied, the Ghostwalkers have gone back to being ghosts as they should be. There was an elevation mechanism that transported him from the underground where the library existed to the top floor of the Citadel. As he stepped out of the elevator, he met Shin in the bright hallway, who was walking down. "Father!" Northern quickly called out, running towards Shin. Immediately he heard. Shin turned back. Compared to his beaten and battered look while they were at the border, his eyes seemed to have gained a little life. He smiled as Northern came towards him. He was holding a pile of paper. Northern looked at the paper and curiously inquired, "What are you carrying?" Shin let out a soft smile as he responded, his face almost shining. "Since they were kind enough to accept us temporarily and even help and provide for us, I think it is only polite that I help the secretaries in any possible way I can." Northern watched his father respond, his face frozen with dark disgust. He shook his head vigorously almost a second later, rebuking, "You are not my father. Who are you?" Shin stood there, a light smile etched on his lips, eyes closed. Northern sighed and broke the main news. "Anyway, I have found a lead on Mother." Chapter 512. Intro. Rise of the Revolutionalist. In the labyrinth of damp stone, a man moved through the narrow, winding passageways of the underground prison like a regal shadow, his presence commanding attention even within the oppressive walls. His black hair fell past his shoulders, streaked with a sharp contrast of white that caught the dim, flickering light from the iron lanterns. A single red scar traced over an eye, stopping on his cheek, a mark of a past battle that had left him unchanged in his stoic demeanor. His eyes, half-lidded with an indifference only sharpened by his inner focus, scanned the gloom ahead. On either side of him marched two soldiers, both of whom strode alongside him with purpose and stoicism, struggling to stand up to his. Their tailored jackets' brass buttons gleamed in the low light. A scarlet sash draped across their chests, contrasting against the polished silver of their epaulets. Their high-collared uniforms were rigid with authority, every line precise, the dark trousers tucked neatly into knee-high, black leather boots. Atop their heads, a tall shako crowned with a plume added to their imposing stature. The man was also dressed in the same manner, except that he had no headgear, and over his pitch-black uniform was a black overflowing coat and a long curved sword strapped to the right side of his waist. The air grew colder as they descended deeper into the dungeon's bowels. The stench of wet stone and rot thickened, though it never seemed to touch him. His expression remained unbothered, as though the darkness itself bent to his will, recoiling at his presence. The walls around him, slick with dampness and grime, groaned in protest as if recognizing that someone of his caliber did not belong in these forsaken depths. But there was a purpose to his journey. A rusted iron gate appeared before them, leading to the innermost sanctum of the prison. The guards hesitated, but he moved forward without pause. The gate creaked open, the sound loud and jarring in the silence. He stepped through, his movements measured, unhurried. Inside, the space was cramped, lit by a single torch flickering in its sconce, casting long, erratic shadows. The cells beyond were dark recesses in the walls, filled with the whispers of forgotten souls. But he was not here to feel pity. He moved past the cells and finally stopped in front of one, his sharp eyes falling on the prisoner, hidden deep within the darkness. The prisoner sat cross-legged in the core of the engulfing darkness. As the man stopped in front of the cell, his eyes opened, a gleaming white orb, glowing in the cold embrace of the shadows. The man sent down a look of disdain, his eyes viciously emphasizing the air of authority that loomed around him. He turned to the guard on his side and commanded, his voice reverberating in the hollowness of the dungeon. "Open it." His voice was rich and steady, carrying the weight of his command without the need for volume. The soldier to his right hesitated but suppressed his fears immediately and hurriedly proceeded to open the barred gates to the prison. After several clankings, he stepped back, bowing his head. The gate slowly creaked open. The man fearlessly pocketed one hand, resting the other on the hilt of his sword while he entered the cell. "It is you, isn't it? The prophet." The man raised his white orb eyes to meet the gaze of the man towering above him. "Lieutenant Dante, oof, the glory of your presence is oppressing the creatures of darkness, like a malignant light, spreading to illuminate and burn. I am not interested in your prophetic rant." He snatched the prisoner's hair before his eyes could follow, then lifted the prisoner to his face like a weightless doll. "I hear you have the ability to see the future." The prisoner, despite being pulled by his hair, expressed no displeasure. His face was deadpan as the man asked his question. As he answered, a smile slowly curved his lips. "It's more complicated than seeing the future. Let's just say, I am a ticking time bomb all is waiting patiently to destroy." The man narrowed his eyes, discontented. "Like I said, I am uninterested in your prophecy, its puzzles and their pieces. What use are you to me?" The prisoner's smile spread into a sinister grin. He spread his hands, shining his teeth like a man ridden by madness. He brayed, "I see a world where you stand at the pinnacle of the Central Plains and march to merge the world together once again. This vision of an age to come is the reason why you are standing before me." He paused and resumed with a low and melancholic tone. "However, there is one person that you will need to ascertain your victory." The man grimaced. He clenched the entire face of the prisoner with quick hand movements and smashed the prisoner into the wall of the prison. Stone debris flew out as a webbed crack ran into the wall. When did he move? The prisoner could not comprehend. They were in the middle of the prison. He didn't sense the man move at all, just his back crashing into the wall and a network of pain spreading across his back. "Indeed, he is the one. He is a paragon. Do you think I have come this far to rely on someone? Gah!" He struggled to speak as he gargled with blood in his mouth. The man released him, causing him to fall on the low mattress laid on the ground. The guy coughed up blood several times and steadied his breath as he explained. "It is not that you need him. It is just that there is only one person that Ul has no control over in this entire continent. Having him by your side, I'm sure it would make your actions unpredictable to a certain degree. The man furrowed his brows, lingering for a few seconds before inquiring, "And who is this person?" I don't know, but having me by your side will help you find him faster. Have me with you, and I shall pave the way for your majesty to tread." The man narrowed his eyes viciously for a second, then pocketed his hand. "What good are you? I have waited 23 years for this moment. I have prepared in every way for the day you shall approach me, for the day that the purge will begin, the day that the revolutionalist shall rise again. I am every good that you need." The man's eyes ignited with a subtle but intensely mad spark. "You said the purge. You really know. I am your ultimate weapon." Silence settled in the dungeon as the man examined the prisoner kneeling before him, his eyes carrying a weight of overwhelming authority. Chapter 513. Alistran. Northern, Ryan, and Shin stood in front of Thalen's table. Thalen himself was sitting on the table. The place looked more scattered with papers and maps than it had been just a few days ago. Northern was curious as to why he had been so busy with documents and maps, but not all curiosity of his needed to be satisfied. It didn't bother him to the edge. Besides, he had his own matters to deal with. The day before, Thalen had informed him of certain information that said there was a major clash of the followers of Vitten with the government. However, there were several facets to this news. Thalen believed it could be random trouble that leaked out, or it could be that someone else had discovered that they were not of this world. Although he had immediately felt like the latter guess was just a result of his insecurities and overthinking. It was most likely the former. Northern inputted the possibility of a trap, but Thalen expressed so much trust in the authenticity of his information that it was impossible for it to have been a trap to lure anyone. If it was, his information source would have known that fact also. He didn't say it, but Northern already figured that this information organization was probably the same one Shin was planning to go to, which meant they indeed worked for Therion or were a branch of Therion. Hence, the three of them had assembled here to move as soon as possible to Arcadia. The door of the library opened, and a tall, green-haired person walked in with an elegant and controlled posture. He was draped in a flowing black robe with delicate gold accents. He seemed to glide rather than walk, his movements graceful, deliberate, almost as if each gesture was calculated to perfection. There was an air of mastery around him. Upon approaching them, he casually placed his hands around Thalen, with a whimsical smile on his lips. "Yeah, everyone, this is Alistran, the assistant headmaster of Thalen Citadel." "Oh!" Northern's eyes went round. From the moment he entered, there had been a different air around him. "But I didn't actually expect he'd be the assistant headmaster and he's human. If he's acting like that around Thalen, then they must be friends. These are a bunch of strong ones you've got here, buddy." His tone rang out, confirming Northern's internal speculation. "Yes, they are the new temporary recruits of the Citadel." Alistran looked into his friend's eyes, his expression briefly serious. "You are doing that, aren't you? We can talk about it when you come back. For now, I need you." Alistran turned his stunning green eyes to Northern and his crew. If you involved me, then it must really mean a deal or two," he said, his tone carrying an underlying intensity beneath its casualness. Thalen focused on the three of them opposite him. "Alistran is the best scout in the whole of this continent." He brought his eyes particularly to Northern. "And he is capable of protecting himself and all of you, although I doubt if you'll be needing his protection. But the one thing I am sure you'll be needing is his leadership. He knows Arcadia very well and can guide you." Immediately, Alistran staggered back, his face paling. "What? Arcadia? Are you insane? Why would I want to go to that place?" Thalen closed his eyes peacefully, breathing out. Northern, on the other hand, was irritated. "Didn't you tell him where he was going?" "Actually, I didn't tell him where he would be going. I just said he'd be escorting some people to a place," he pointed out tiredly. "Because I knew he'd be like this and might even refuse to go. This made me extremely curious about why this city scares people so much. No, this is not a matter of me being like this. I really don't want to go there. You know I need to lay low for a while. And you will be laying low. No pressure, they are well enough to protect themselves as you can see. Alistran took a moment of pause, examining the three people standing before him with a scrunched-up face. Then he turned his eyes to his friend beside him. I'm serious. I really won't interfere no matter what. You won't need to, Northern responded before Thalen could, a cold glare freezing the air between them. His voice was sharp, like a blade cutting through the tension, leaving no room for doubt or discussion. Alistran stood up, placing his hands on his waist, letting out a weird chuckle. Well then, I am satisfied. I will take you to Arcadia and show you around. Thalen sighed, as if he had just dodged a bullet thanks to Northern. He then intoned, Please, you guys can carry on. I'll brief him and then send him out to you. All right, thank you, sir. Shin responded and turned around. Northern glanced at both of them before turning around to follow Shin and Ryan. After the door got shut, a deadly serious expression rose on Thalen's face. You seem to be going out of your way to help them. What's the catch? I know I said not to interfere, but there's something I need you to do for me. Alistran's expression changed a little bit, worriedly boring into Thalen's soul. Ignoring the look on Alistran's face, Thalen continued. The person they want to save. If you feel the situation cannot permit her to be saved, she is a figure that might jeopardize all our plans. I want you to kill her and everyone. His tone rang out with a cold indifference. How wicked of you. Well, if it's what you think will protect us and all we have worked so hard to build, then I will do it. Thalen's expression broke into a smile, radiating with kindness. Thank you very much for this, Al. For all you have been doing. Alistran's expression froze for a moment with a smile. He tapped Thalen's shoulders, his pleasant smile almost glowing. You don't need to thank me. I thank the day I met you 20 years ago because of it. I have been able to live my life so fulfillingly. If I die now, there's nothing to regret. Thalen's eyes narrowed. You won't be dying. It's Arcadia. That damn place has an element of unpredictability. It will be fine as long as you don't run into them. And what are the chances of not running into them? Thalen did not respond immediately, but Alistran was not waiting for his response either. He smiled and dragged Thalen into his embrace, wrapping his muscled arms around and tapping his back. It might be a last farewell, but don't be emotional. With or without me, you can do this. Just don't be too hard on yourself. Thalen felt an unexplainable, powerful ease settle into his entire soul. He bit down on his lips and forced himself to mutter, Thank you, but please, don't die. Chapter 514, Mr. Tour Guide. Northern had been worried about how their journey was going to go, solely because of the warp gate issue. Of course, he had a little money right now. Thalen had been an incredibly helpful source recently. Apart from paying Northern for helping him to successfully scout potentially powerful drifters, he helped register Northern's identity as a regular drifter, not the incomplete license he had before. Now, Northern could present his identity card to any Citadel, government official, or security avenue that demanded it. Thalen also helped him to open an account with the Central Plains Silver Bank. There were 3 kinds of banks in the Central Plain: the Silver Bank, the Gold Bank, and the Diamond Bank. The Silver Bank was mainly used by commoners and low-ranked nobles at large, a population that wanted to save and withdraw their money in credits. Since the circulation of Orens was scarce and that of CRYSTS was even scarcer, the Gold and Diamond Banks presumably served higher-ranked individuals or merchants, dealing in Orens and CRYSTS respectively, though the circulation of these higher-value currencies was limited. Silver banks facilitated everyday transactions and savings for the majority of the population. Commoners used the bank to store small amounts of wealth and withdraw for basic needs like food, rent, and trade. Essentially, the Silver Bank's focus was maintaining economic stability among the lower classes by encouraging savings and providing security for modest amounts of wealth. The Gold Bank supported large transactions such as land purchases, investments, and trade deals. It served as a repository for wealthier individuals and entities, helping them manage larger sums of money in a stable manner. They encouraged investment, business expansion, and larger-scale trade among the elite class and successful merchants. The Diamond Bank functioned as a major motor of the economy, used for the rarest, most valuable transactions, such as financing wars, funding major trade expeditions between nations, or controlling powerful assets like rift resources and unclaimed territories. They operated as a hub for controlling the economy on a macro scale, influencing the overall economic stability of nations and regions. Every drifter without a nobility title or high-ranking government office was required to open a silver bank account, even if they were merchants. The banking system could also be considered a sort of ladder that enabled one to climb higher in the economic system of the Central Plains. But in a likewise pattern, it could also lead one to descend lower in that same economic system. All that mattered in the end was one's source of income and how they managed their wealth. The silver bank had a silver card with a specified index that allowed individuals to access their funds by just going to any silver bank outlet, which were mostly available in citadels and large market franchises. Some taverns were also prominent enough to enlist a member of the bank to work for them, directly managing their funds from customers. So, Northern could withdraw his money almost anywhere and everywhere, and he could use his card for purchases without needing to spend physical money. In the past few days of working for and with Thalen, he had gained quite a lot of money, along with their incentives as a temporary members of the Citadel. Ryan had even asked him to keep his. Of course, Shin also had a silver bank account of his own. Looking at his card, Northern grinned a little before tucking it back into the pocket of his fitted black pants that tapered smoothly down to his heavy, rugged combat boots. The boots, with thick soles and metal accents, gave a tough and rebellious edge to the look, complementing the long coat that adorned his upper body, flowing with every slight movement of the wind. The coat appeared to be made from a sleek, high-quality material, its length adding a sense of dramatic flair as it moved with his frame. Underneath the coat was a black shirt, tight-fitting, framing his slightly broad chest. It was simple, adding to the streamlined and understated design of the entire outfit. Northern's entire ensemble leaned towards dark, modern, and tactical, with a mysterious and confident edge. Shin and Ryan had also changed their outfits, looking more presentable, more like renowned drifters and less like survivors. Finally, Alistran strolled out of the building, meeting them at the compound. Northern turned around just after pocketing his card, calmly observing the man as he got closer to them. Alistran cupped his hands together, bowing a little bit with his whimsical smile, a smile that made it difficult to tell what he was thinking. "Your favorite tour guide is ready to take you round the world," he yelled. Northern moved his head slightly away. "This journey is going to be a lot. It is great to have you on this one, Mr. Tour Guide. What route are we taking to Arcadia?" Alistran spoke with his hand rubbing his chin. Son, you look like the eldest. I think I like you."
So?
Northern blinked, exchanging glances between Shin and Alistran. Shin smiled sheepishly as Alistran curved an arm over his neck and rambled on. "For a low-key movement, we will be following a caravan to Elmuish. Then we'll board an airship straight to Arcadia." He simpered. "Easy, right? Easy, right?" "Yes, very easy, Mr. Tour Guide. I'm sure this is all thanks to your exquisite touring sense." Alistran suddenly froze, his pupils expanding. He felt the wind of new realization caress his face. "Are you okay, Mr. Tour Guide?" He stared in absence, even as Shin tried to call him to the present. "Mr. Tour Guide. Mr. Tour Guide." Finally, he snapped out of his thoughts and focused on Shin with a smile spread from one ear to the other. He leaned on Shin. "You and I are going to get along." Shin stared with blinking eyes but muttered either way, "Sure, I guess." "Well then, to Elmuish," he commanded with a loud tone and marched forward. Shin followed right after. "Yes, yes, Mr. Tour Guide." Northern, by the way, stared blankly from behind. Seeing Shin like this made him remember the old days. There was a reason as to why Shin was very popular with kids around the countryside. He had that shameless ability to put aside his grown-up self and relate to a child and a fool the way they needed to be related to. a value that had made the whole countryside love and depend on him. But recently, Shin hadn't been what he had always known him to be. That joyful, playful nature had vanished totally. What existed of him was silence and an air of regret and melancholy. I guess it's good that he is being himself again. Northern let loose a small smile as he followed them from behind. Chapter 5:15. Sorta bandit trouble. For a few days, they boarded a local caravan, transporting unknown goods from South Drywall to Elmuish. Unlike the two cities Northern had been to since his return from the Dark Continent, Elmuish was different. It was no free city or governmental city. Instead, it was a city that served as the capital state of the Kingdom of Sassex, an old power kingdom. Nations in the Central Plains are divided into two major categories: the Old Power and New Power. People often referred to the Old Power kingdoms as nations whose histories are rooted in the early beginnings of the Central Plains. You'll find their activity running as deep as the history of the Central Plains goes. Because of this, they tend to carry more political significance and national independence power. This translates into their military strength, national financial pocket, trade authority, and special resources. There are some resources that you will find in these old power kingdoms that you won't find elsewhere. Sometimes, not in all nations, their entire ecosystem, down to military power, is often built according to these resources. These resources are usually normal materials that have been affected by soul essence and the effect of several rifts manifesting in certain areas for an extended duration. Because of this, the resources have mutated and evolved, becoming something valuable enough to match the importance of the resources that are found in the rifts themselves. Then the new power kingdoms are, of course, newly built and established kingdoms. They might be financially more stable than even old power kingdoms sometimes, but old power kingdoms would often be found with the resources and sometimes military power. Including the Empire, Central Plains had 12 kingdoms, 5 of which are old power. Aside from these 12 monarch domains, there exist several cities, clan territories, dark plains, and islands, all of them still a part of the Central Plains. For example, Arcadia is an island that had solely belonged to the government. The island that the Academy was situated on is practically a city of its own. No governmental or national authority affected this place. It was why the Academy was almost like a continent of its own. And also why the Supreme Student Union had an authority that was absolute. Sassex had 7 cities, including Elmuish, and is prominent for its wood, called Elderwood timber. Wood? How come wood is what a nation is prominent for? Northern spoke nonchalantly, but deeply he understood what that must mean. However, he didn't want to, for now, display such reasonable understanding. At least, asking the obvious and not understanding the easily understandable would give Alistran the opportunity to greatly underestimate him. Although he didn't need to pretend to that extent for Alistran to underestimate him, he was 16. Everybody underestimates him. But what doing this would cause Alistran to be is less vigilant around him. So, he wouldn't strain to put some pieces of certain puzzles together as to the true reason why he is following them. Like hell I would believe Thalen called in a favor with a friend this strong just because he wants to help us? He didn't trust Thalen at all, and for that he was super wary of Alistran. Although he was so casual towards the man that no one could even figure that out. Yes, but timber wood is not just wood, Alistran explained, raising a finger with a chuckle. He looked like he was telling late-night, dark stories to a bunch of children. It's just wood really, Northern responded with an ignorant tone. This kind of wood cannot decay, and there are grades to it. Some can even deflect steel. Northern's entire face expanded with a childlike surprise. That's a lie. You'll see when we get there. The city guards of the kingdom, even the knights and all the soldiers, they all wear wooden armor. Northern scrunched up his face. No way. His reactions to the man's words deserved a special space in Thalen's heavenly library. That was how phenomenal they were. Suddenly, the caravan stopped. The part they were in was a wooden cart, filled with grass-like carpets and barrels. Ryan was resting on one of the barrels, while Shin was sitting cross-legged, also paying attention to what Alistran was saying but not actively in the conversation. Northern looked around. Oh, Alistran smirked. It was quite obvious he knew something. What's wrong? Northern probed. Since we joined this caravan as security mercenaries, we would get disturbed a lot. He spoke with a dark grin on his face. Is that so? Why the hell are you grinning about that? Yes. There'll often be sorta troubles during our journey. Sorta blocked roads, sorta bandits, sorta troubles. Northern, honestly, at this point, was dumbfounded. Sometimes, it was like he was trying so hard to be funny that watching him try so hard to be funny just becomes, in a way, funny. Northern suppressed an urge to grin. Thankfully, the person that opened the wooden door of the closed cart they were in made it easy. Esteemed drifters, I think there's a roadblock in front. Oh? Roadblock, Alistran said, caressing his chin with his thumb, index, and middle finger. Yes, sir. What do we do? Northern narrowed his eyes a bit. What do we do? I see. If there's a roadblock, it must mean they are close by. He turned to Alistran. They who? Bandits, Shin responded. Who wants to vanquish the foes of darkness and make justice reign again? He trumpeted, raising his hands up like a mace of glory for anyone to grab. Sadly, all three of his cartmates totally ignored him. Uninterested, Northern said. I think I'll pass on this one, Mr. Tour Guide. Alistran's green eyes defeatedly glided towards Ryan. Snore, snore, snore. You weren't sleeping before. Liar. Sir Drifter? The man perturbed. Alistran begrudgingly jumped outside the cart and headed towards the blockade. It was a pile of logs, stacked on each other. He angrily kicked them out of the way, sending them flying into the nearby forest both on the left and right. Then, with his head oozing hot steams of grudge, he marched back to the cart behind the main caravan and settled inside, folding his arms like a child. Northern stared at him blankly before bringing to his attention. It is important to note that you'll also be the one delivering justice to your foes of darkness. What? That's unfair. Talk about fair. We didn't know we were going to be mercenaries. Don't they charge money for these things? Chapter 5:16. The Impregnable Wall. Works like this were usually commissioned to the Citadel. It was just like placing a request for drifters to help secure a certain caravan to its endpoint. Hence, there was no way this was a random caravan. But Alistran had made it sound like they had gotten this one by chance. As if the caravan was doing them a favor. Worse, Northern even suspected that this was a caravan that belonged to Therion itself. Of course, this suspicion was just on a single base for now, so he just shoved it to the back of his mind. Instead, he closed his eyes and entered the limitless void, thinking one last thing. Whatever their scheme is, it's useless anyway. He was greeted by the new beauty in the limitless void, a strange mixture of heaven and hell, with shadowy floors contrasting against ravishing azure lights. Sinister flames burned on the border steps of his throne, creating an impenetrable veil for any being lesser than him. The stark aura of evil supremacy poured heavily into the hall the moment he appeared, and the place suddenly seemed to burn and shine brighter. Northern exhaled, the blue lights of the hall darkly reflecting on one side of his face as he leaned with one hand resting on his throne. Night Terror appeared beyond the flames, obediently bowing before standing upright. The creature began to move its hands, growling and groaning, trying to communicate with its master. I see. Is that so? Northern responded, nodding slowly. Okay. There's no problem. Then, let me go check it out. Northern responded like this to each of the stalwart devil's groans and growls of complaints. After which, he disappeared from the throne and appeared in the red mines. Being in this place again made memories flood his mind. Why have I been thinking so much about this place and what happened here lately? Northern shook his head and walked forward with purpose. After a while, he stood before a certain man. After a while, he was standing before a certain person. The man had small and shallow cuts all over his shirtless body, but he did not mind them and consistently slammed the pickaxe against the small heap of red crystal before him. He was so focused that he did not detect Northern's presence for over a couple of minutes, until Northern's voice cut through the silence. You seem to be doing better than I expected. Linus's eyes shot wide as he heard Northern's voice. He spun around, his axe arcing viciously from the side. Wham! Northern stood there, completely at ease, as if the force of the blow was nothing more than a breeze. The air itself seemed to shudder from the impact, but the axe went no further, stopped dead, hanging inches from Northern's side. Look, I have the power to kill you if I want, but I'm not going to do that. He paused, glancing down at the heaps of crystal Linus had leveled. Then he looked at the cuts on Linus's body. I first learned the meaning of bloodlust here, in these red crystals. Of course, before that, I had nearly tasted death myself. Perhaps that's why I was able to sense it so much. The fear of dying over and over, the pain that stung across my entire body. His voice carried a soft resonance. They're all gone now, but I still remember vividly how much of a hell this place was. He chuckled softly. This hell, though, is where my story began. I think, in a way, I'm thankful for it. Linus's eyes burned with the red-hot flames of anger as Northern spoke, though a hint of wariness lingered beneath the rage. After glancing around with a small smile on his lips, Northern finally turned his face to Linus, the last trace of that smile fading. The air between them grew thick and dark. In that instant, Linus couldn't help but lower his axe, which had been held defensively until now. His entire body suddenly felt cold and heavy. He's even stronger than before. That realization seared into his mind as he gauged Northern's presence, comparing it to when they had met at the harbor. Suddenly, his thoughts raced to the recent disturbances in the limitless void, trying to comprehend how insanely powerful the creature was, the one that had taken an attack strong enough to sever the realm in two just to defeat it. His heart clenched with pain. The more vivid the memories became, the harder it was to accept that the boy standing before him was an impregnable wall. A wall he could never overcome. Standing before Northern like this, Linus was still unwilling to accept it. Defeat starts in the mind. Once a man is defeated there, it's only a matter of time before true downfall comes for him. But what was he supposed to do when faced with such a high wall? A dark metal fortress that stretched into the sky, casting its overwhelming shadows on him. Linus felt suffocated. Beads of sweat trickled down his face. His legs grew weak, trembling until they could no longer bear the weight of his stubborn will, crumbling him to the ground. Linus fell to his knees, bending forward on the hard red ground, gritting his teeth as his nails scratched against it. How are you so strong? His voice rang with pain and torment. He had lived his whole life training. From a young age, he had been praised as a prodigy. He had lived for 28 years, and 22 of them had been solely dedicated to growing stronger. He was an ascendant, and with more hard work, he was sure to become a paragon before he died. He was a beacon of hope and strength. Yet all that pride and glory meant nothing when he crossed paths with the wall standing before him. Nothing had made sense since he met Northern. Northern bent down before him, exhaling calmly. He extended a hand to Linus. Do you want to become stronger? Linus looked up at him, a remnant of rage still burning in his eyes. But there was also pain, torment, and a swelling resolve in his hardened gaze. Are you going to tell me to serve you? Northern wrinkled his nose in disgust. What? No. Serve me? Why? So you can stab me later? No, you're not going to serve me. I want to employ you. Chapter 517. Jeskai vs. Black Mamba. Northern appeared in the tower, sitting cross-legged as he watched the duel between Jeskai and Black Mamba unfold. Both their spears sliced through the air like streaks of black and red lightning. The faint sound of steel slicing the wind hummed in the space between them, followed by the rapid, rhythmic clash of weapons meeting in flashes of crimson and shadow. Jeskai's breath came in controlled bursts, her pulse synchronized with the lightning-quick strikes of her spear. Her movements were fluid. Each step barely touched the ground before she sprang forward again, her spear a graceful extension of her body. Every thrust was met with an answering parry from Black Mamba, whose lithe figure moved like a shadow in water, effortlessly absorbing the force of each blow. His speed made him seem almost untouchable, like a phantom slipping through the air, leaving only a faint ripple in his wake. The air around them seemed to warp, distorting as their bodies blurred in and out of focus. From a distance, Northern's eyes followed the fight with sharp intensity, an amazed smile frozen on his face. He could hear the whistling of the spears cutting through the air, so fast that they sounded like rushing wind. The ground beneath them shifted and cracked with every swift, forceful motion. Yet there was an elegance in the chaos, a deadly dance where neither Jeskai nor Black Mamba faltered. It's like they're completing each other's movements, Northern thought. There was a synergy between them, a kind only possible after centuries of training together with the same footwork and combat style. How long have they been doing this? Northern's heart leaped with excitement. He had grown so strong that he'd forgotten about furthering his understanding of chaos footwork, but watching them rekindled something in him. The fast, blurry movements, the insanely quick reflexes, the way they clashed with each other unrestrained, yet flawlessly flowing in and out of sync. Northern cupped his hand over his mouth, utterly stunned. For Jeskai to match Black Mamba's pace like this, she must have put in some crazy work. Northern's mind raced. Clearly, Jeskai's stamina was nothing compared to Black Mamba's, but her focus was razor-sharp, her senses heightened as she predicted Black Mamba's next move, a feint. She spun gracefully to avoid his spear, the tip barely grazing her side. She could feel the shift in the air against her skin, as if the weapon had carved space itself. Black Mamba's eyes gleamed. His lithe body twisted as his shadowy black spear whistled through the air with brutal precision, but Jeskai moved in tandem with his strikes, countering each one with her own. The clash intensified, their strikes echoing across the room. Sweat glistened on Jeskai's skin, and the taste of iron lingered in the air, blending with the sharp, metallic tang of their weapons. Northern watched, his lips pressed into a thin line as he assessed every movement. For a brief moment, everything slowed. Jeskai saw an opening, a faint crack in Black Mamba's defense. She surged forward, her spear gliding in a perfect arc toward him. But Black Mamba twisted, his body bending unnaturally fast. His spear swept low, deflecting hers with a sound like steel sliding against glass. The force of the deflection sent a shockwave through the ground, scattering sharp sparks and gravel into the air. Northern inhaled deeply, sensing the shift in momentum as both fighters recoiled, their bodies tense, ready for the next strike. And then, as if cued by the same silent rhythm, they moved again. Faster this time, a blur of movement so intense it was almost impossible to distinguish where one began and the other ended. Jeskai, her breath now sharper and quicker, pressed the attack. Her spear danced in her hands, swift and unpredictable, each strike building upon the last. She wasn't just reacting. She was pushing Black Mamba, forcing him to adapt to her relentless assault. Her stamina waned, sweat bubbled on her skin, yet her precision sharpened with each passing second. It was as though she had entered a state of perfect clarity, where nothing mattered but the next strike, the next movement, the next decision. Black Mamba, however, remained an enigma. His movements fluid, almost lazy, yet there was no mistaking the danger lurking behind his lethargy. His black spear moved like a living thing, twisting and coiling in his hands, turning every strike into a lethal counter. Where Jeskai was fierce and direct, he was elusive, drawing her in only to slip away at the last moment. Yet even in his evasions, there was an unshakable power within him, a coiled spring waiting to strike. As Northern stared at the fight, an idea suddenly came to him. What if I use it now? There was no better time. A wide grin spread across his lips, and his eyes glowed with a faint blue hue. And barely a second later his mouth fell. Then what he saw happened. In one swift, almost imperceptible motion, Black Mamba broke the rhythm. His spear struck with a speed that Northern might have found difficult to follow if he hadn't already seen it milliseconds before. A black blur cut through the air toward Jeskai's exposed side. Jeskai reacted, twisting her body with near-impossible speed, her spear coming up just in time to parry. The impact reverberated through her arms, and for a moment, she faltered. Black Mamba didn't miss the opportunity. His spear lashed out again, this time aimed low, a sweeping strike meant to unbalance her. Jessai's feet barely left the ground before she sprang upward, flipping gracefully over the deadly arc. Her body twisted mid-air, her spear aimed downward in retaliation as she descended. Northern's heart pounded as he watched the maneuver. Even knowing it beforehand didn't diminish the excitement. Black Mamba had broken their rhythm intentionally, luring Jesai in to crush her. It was incredibly innovative. It took a genius to break a flow like that and redirect it into something more vicious, striking like a viper without digging his own grave. But what was even more shocking for Northern was Jesai's maneuver. It was bold, reckless, even. If only she landed that strike, if only it wasn't Black Mamba, Northern thought. Time seemed to slow as Black Mamba looked up, his eyes locking onto Jesai. For a split second, their gazes met, a silent exchange of understanding. Then, with a flick of his wrist, Black Mamba's spear snapped upward, intercepting Jesai's strike with impossible timing. The force of the clash sent a shockwave rippling through the air, and both fighters were thrown back, landing in perfect synchrony on opposite sides of the room. Their chests heaved as they caught their breath, their eyes locked onto each other, assessing, calculating. The air was thick with tension. Northern could feel it pressing against his skin, electrifying the atmosphere. Oops, that's enough. As both of them flashed out of their positions, Northern also vanished, intercepting the two of them before they could collide. Their eyes widened as they saw him suddenly appear, levitating in the air. They hurriedly halted their movements but couldn't help crashing into Northern's void force. They fell right in front of him, stopped by the air, and slumped down. Northern clapped for them both as he gently hovered down. Now that's what I call progress. Chapter 518, Jesai's Growth. Your Highness! Jesai staggered to her feet, only to drop to one knee as Northern's feet touched the ground. Really, you should pity yourself sometimes, Northern said, his gaze settling gently on her with a hint of sympathy. Black Mamba was also on both knees, paying absolute obeisance to his master. Strangely, Northern didn't mind it when Black Mamba or Night Terror did this. In fact, he expected it of them. However, when humans did it, is it because of the void? He wondered. To be honest, he still harbored doubts about Jesai. After all, she was human, and humans were true only to their desires. He wasn't questioning her loyalty right now. Jesai's desire was to serve him. But what would happen when that changed? She might begin to distance herself, looking for a reasonable way to break away from him without causing harm. Which would be because of her human ego, Northern mused. She'd feel bad about the promises she made and want to make up for them without continuing to be loyal or accountable. She'd try not to hurt me, but what if she wasn't honorable enough to care about his feelings? He couldn't vouch for anyone's loyalty as long as crimson blood flowed in their veins and their eyes sparkled with any kind of resolve. That's why Jesai's unbridled show of loyalty toward him continued to feel uncomfortable, forced, and unnecessary. It wasn't true loyalty, merely gestures, and even he understood that much. Someone could smile to your face, tell you that you meant the world to them, only to show up later with the very dagger you gifted them as a kitchen knife to stab you in the back. It's my fault for gifting them a dagger. Should have found something blunt so it'd hurt less, I guess. Master! Jesai called out to him. Northern's cold expression softened a bit as he forced a warm enough smile to ease the tension in the room. How have you been? It's been a while, hasn't it? I've been doing great. Thank you for bringing me here. Northern glanced around the room as Jesai responded. Her voice filled with a tired but enthusiastic vigor, despite the glistening sweat that trickled down her face and body. The walls were carved with crude marks, cleanly sliced crevices slitting the concrete. Some were more enormous than others, but all left the room with undeniable evidence of how much work Jesai had been doing. Northern brought his gaze back to her, a corner of his lips curling up. Looks like you've been really busy. It's all thanks to you and your guidance through this monster. Jesai gestured toward Black Mamba with her eyes. Northern blinked in surprise, then looked at Black Mamba, who avoided his gaze as though he knew what he'd done wrong. This guy, Night Terror said he strongly warned him not to interfere, and he still went ahead and did it. And now there's a misunderstanding. He didn't know how to explain to Jessie that this wasn't the case without giving an unnecessary talk about what Black Mamba really was. Besides, he didn't feel there was any need to. The more she misunderstood, the further it took her from his truth. Should he decide to share his secrets one day, he would, though he doubted that day would ever come. I'm glad you've grown. I don't have much time. I just came to check up on you. Has anyone seen Mr. Fluffy around? Mr. Fluffy? Jessie tilted her head, then widened her eyes as she realized. Oh, the big white wolf. Yes, Northern replied calmly, watching her strangely cute expression with interest. It was a stark contrast to how she was when they first met. Now she seemed like an innocent, clueless child. She should let more of that smile out, not the crazy, insane ones. I haven't been outside since, so I really don't know. What about you? She turned to Black Mamba, who shook his head. I see. Night Terror unfurled in a mass of black tendrils, manifesting into a kneeling position. He looked at Northern and growled with hand gestures. It was oddly comical to see such a sinister being try to mimic human behavior. Tugged at Jessie's heart with confusion. What were they? How were they connected to Northern? These questions had plagued her mind since the day she first saw them, but she had pushed them aside, unwilling to ask. It wasn't her place to know. Northern's gaze suddenly grew distant as he stared forward, spaced out. A second later, his eyes refocused, and a smile spread across his lips. Night Terror. Find out what Mr. Fluffy has been up to. Then he turned to Jessie. Keep training. I also think you should head to the Red Mine. There's a lot for you to learn there. With that, he vanished from their sight. As soon as Northern disappeared, Night Terror shot Black Mamba a death glare before melting into the ground. A warm smile of fulfillment crept across Jessie's face. She clenched her fists and jumped up happily. Yes, I managed to impress him. Black Mamba clapped for her, though his expression was bored, and the clap was very dull. But Jessie didn't even notice. Her eyes radiated with renewed resolve as she vowed. This is just the beginning of my growth. I'll become strong enough to protect you, Your Highness. Black Mamba clapped again, disinterested in her feelings but genuinely wanting to cheer her on, as she often did for him. During their training, whenever he managed to evolve a move they had both been stuck on, she would always clap. He had no idea how or why it worked, but he assumed it did. Another really creepy thing he was learning to do was smile. Northern opened his eyes to the slight warmth of the cart they were in. It was deep into the afternoon, and the light hidden behind the horizon seemed extra harsh today. But that didn't really matter. He was more interested in Alistran, who was kicking bandits away as if they were mere balls. Chapter 519, The Old Joker. Northern and Shin, from inside the enclosed cart, peeped out through the window, watching as Alistran dealt with the bandits. Fascinatingly, he didn't seem to put any significant effort into it. His hands were crossed behind his back as he nimbly kicked them around. His movements were fluid, like a well-practiced dance. His feet barely touched the ground, yet the force of each kick sent a bandit sprawling through the air. The way he moved, almost as if the very air bent to his will, made it hard to believe the bandits stood any chance at all. One of the braver ones charged Alistran from behind, a deadly blade drawn, but Alistran didn't even bother to turn around. With a sharp pivot, he lifted his foot and kicked the bandit squarely in the chest, sending him flying back into a tree with a dull thud. Wow, he makes fighting look so easy, Northern commented. It's probably his combat style, Shin replied. How so? Northern paused for a moment, recalling that Shin was supposed to be a well-versed drifter with extensive combat experience. Not to mention, he was a scion of the Kageyama clan, though whatever that meant to Shin in the present was unclear. Recently, Northern's desire to grow stronger and develop his own combat style had been rekindled, thanks to Jessie and Black Mamba. If he needed a teacher, and he felt he did, his father could be the one. After all, he was a deadly warrior, or could be, since I haven't seen the extent of his combat abilities. But in the past, Shin had vehemently refused to teach him anything regarding combat, especially the Kageyama style. As Alistran effortlessly dispatched the last of the bandits, both Northern and Shin settled back inside the cart. Northern studied Shin for a few moments before speaking. "Father," he called softly. Shin turned to Northern, slightly surprised. He almost felt as if Northern had been trying to avoid calling him father since they returned. But then again, he wasn't too surprised. He knew his son had always been a complex individual. "Yes, my son," Shin responded with a warm smile spreading across his lips. Northern looked down, hesitating as if he were waiting for something. Then, as Alistran re-entered the cart, Northern continued, "I would like to learn martial arts from you." "Oh!" The old joker couldn't help but be awed by the first words he heard upon joining them. Even Ryan seemed to have slightly opened his eyes, though no one noticed. Shin stared blankly for a moment, blinking before recovering. "But you're strong. What would you need that for?" Northern chuckled faintly, looking down with darkened eyes, memories surfacing. "When I first held a weapon, it was to defend myself against a horror I knew I was powerless against. Do you know what saved me?" Though his tone was questioning, Northern didn't seem to expect an answer. He continued after a short pause. "The drills we had while growing up, and saying they saved me is an overstatement. They were useless anyway. Things wouldn't have been any different even if I could wield a sword at the time. But maybe, down the line, I could have prevented the crude injury I sustained." He chuckled, dispelling the tension that had begun to settle in the air. There were people my age who could already fend for themselves, defend and fight monsters because their family lineage taught them how. I had to learn by facing the ugly side of war. Every battle I fought was an intense struggle to survive, to live just a second longer. Northern let out a pale smile as memories of the wars in the kingdom of Redmine filled his mind. He took a moment to reflect before getting to his point. "In those situations, the sword became an ally, something I grew accustomed to." His eyes glinted with renewed resolve. "I won't deny that I'm strong, but when it comes to close combat, I'm weak to some extent. I only compensate for that weakness with the versatility of my skills. But what I want is to grow without any weaknesses. I don't want my talent's versatility to patch over my flaws. I want it to conform to the peak of my potential, creating a non-stereotypical, ever-changing combat style." As Northern fell silent, he heard someone sniffing. He blinked. Alistran." The situation was quite embarrassing for Northern, having shared a fragment of his past, something he rarely did. Of course, there was a reason for this gesture, though he hadn't expected it to have this much impact on Alistran.
"I'm sorry."
"I'm sorry for sobbing," Alistran said, wiping his eyes. "Hearing about the cruel past you endured, my heart couldn't help but wane for you. You're so young, and you've already faced so much in life. I wish my son could learn from you." Northern was so taken aback that his jaw dropped. "How does an irresponsible man like you even have a son?" Alistran immediately glared daggers at him. Even Shin's expression folded into a frown, silently conveying, "That was rude." Northern quickly realized his mistake. "Oh crap, did I say that out loud? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Alistran scoffed and then giggled. "It's understandable. At my age, people think I should be more serious about life. But what's life without a little fun? As long as it's just a little." Northern made sure to keep his mouth sealed this time. But Northern was more inclined to think that Alistran's definition of little could be unreasonable. Since the beginning of their journey, Alistran had been cracking one joke after another. His casual way of speaking was always laced with humor. Northern didn't find his jokes particularly funny, but sometimes Shin did. The two seemed to get along strangely well. Shin knew how to stroke the old joker's ego in a way that made him want to keep being himself. They even seemed somewhat alike when Northern compared the past Shin to Alistran. The only difference was, while Shin was jovial and lighthearted, he was also truly honest, in both words and deeds. But Alistran? He's full of shoddiness. Chapter 520. The Wooden City, Part 1. Everything about Alistran, from his head to his toes, screamed to Northern. See me, I am shady as hell. It was perplexing that he couldn't figure out what exactly the old joker was thinking. But Northern wasn't in a rush. You see, I've decided to live my life by following my gut and instincts, Alistran said. That way, I've managed to survive deadly situations. My gut and instincts have brought me this far, boy, so I'm unapologetically myself. I just hope my son understands that one day. Alistran sighed. Shin immediately patted his shoulder. I'm sure the young lad will come to appreciate your nature and find value in your philosophy. Right? I know, right? Alistran's tone rose excitedly. As Northern listened to Shin, the more he spoke, the less he resembled the father Northern once knew. What the hell is that? He sounds so nice. I think I might puke. Amid the light-hearted atmosphere, Alistran grinned, gathering everyone's attention with his words. That's that. But do you want to know something right now? He grinned widely, leaning towards Northern. If you're willing to share, I guess. Northern replied shyly. The old joker slapped his thighs as he sat cross-legged. My gut and instincts are telling me you need to learn my unique combat style called Vikora. Northern tilted his head slightly. That's quite a unique name. Is it a heritage? Heritage? No, boy, it's nothing that grand. It's just a kick-ass combat style my decrepit family with forgotten histories passed down to me. At first, it seemed useless, but under my genius intellectual introspection, I found its flaws and rewrote it. Then I learned it better. His countenance fell as he continued. Sadly, though, since I rewrote this combat style, no one has been able to learn it. I've tried teaching it to some renowned drifters, but it was no use. He spoke with a dull tone. You'll probably not get it either, but there's no harm in trying. Shin smiled brightly. I'll do my best to hone your combat skills to their peak, identify your flaws and shortcomings, and then we can start working on those. Northern's lips curved up, a dangerous yet tender smile forming as he said, Thank you. An unheard voice, thin as nylon, suddenly cut through the air. Me too. Everyone turned their faces to Ryan. He's been listening this whole time? Alistran asked in stunned surprise. Shin nodded, wide-eyed. It seems he even sat up and crossed his legs, and we didn't notice. Wow, how is he so sneaky? I have no idea. Northern shook his head in dismay as the two of them kept babbling on. He leaned back and thought about what had just transpired. He wasn't sure Alistran would jump into the conversation at all. The truth was, while he wanted to check if Shin had changed his mind about teaching him the Kageyama style, Northern was also curious to learn Alistran's kick style. From the old joker's behavior, Northern predicted he would eventually jump into the conversation and, if things went well, might even want to teach him by the end of the day. But why would anyone want to teach him? Northern was confused. Combat styles were guarded jealously. Sharing them meant revealing the patterns of your attack and defense. Once someone knew your patterns, they could potentially break them. But that was just the beginning. Breaking your defense and offense was the least they could do with such knowledge. In the hands of a genius, such information could be a lethal weapon used to destroy the drifter themselves. That's why many families guard the secrets of their combat styles, which was probably why Shin had refused to teach him. Shin had insisted it was dangerous. It was a big deal to teach another drifter your combat style. Being a man as shady as Alistran, Northern didn't expect him to agree to it. But then again, the way Alistran spoke about his combat style made Northern wonder. Perhaps it's not his main style. Then again, Alistran said it was unlearnable. Maybe he was confident Northern wouldn't be able to learn it either, possibly due to something he had done to it. Crap. I hate how I can't tell. Trying to figure out what Alistran was thinking suddenly seemed harder than counting a bag of tiny grains. Northern resisted the urge to scratch his head and leaned against the wooden wall of the cart, sighing. At last, the cart finally stopped, and the driver opened the door, announcing, "We've arrived at Elmuish." "Oh, we have?" That felt fast. It hadn't been a fast journey, but perhaps it felt that way because of the busy company, particularly the old joker he was traveling with. With light steps, Alistran jumped out of the cart, straightened his back, and stretched his muscles. He raised his arms high to the sky in jubilation and shouted, "Welcome to the Wooden City, Elmuish." Really, the Wooden City? It sounded funny at first, but a second later, Northern was stunned to discover that Alistran was completely correct. Everything about the city was wooden from beginning to end. Even the knights moved with a graceful yet imposing presence, their armor a testament to the craftsmanship of Elmuish. Their uniforms were a blend of functionality and artistry, constructed from darkened wood reinforced with contrasting bands. The chest plates were carved from thick timber, intricately engraved with the insignia of Sassex, a majestic tree whose roots intertwined with runes of power, glowing faintly with soul essence. Wooden pauldrons rested on their broad shoulders, polished to a smooth sheen, reinforced with another layer of wood, giving them a commanding and durable appearance. Their gauntlets, fashioned from flexible wooden segments, allowed for both dexterity and protection, each fingertip capped with sharp wooden claws. The knights' greaves were similarly constructed, sturdy, resilient, and strapped with leather beneath for comfort, allowing them to move with the agility of trained warriors despite the weight. Over their armor, they wore deep green cloaks, symbolizing their connection to the woods, and trimmed with golden threads, denoting their high status in the kingdom. Their helms, carved from the same dark wood, were fashioned into fierce, bestial shapes, some resembling wolves, others eagles, giving them an intimidating aura. Slits in the helms allowed their sharp eyes to scan the surroundings with vigilance, while beneath the wooden visors, glowing runes pulsed gently, enhancing their perception and alertness. Strapped to their backs or sides were long wooden spears or swords, their blades made of enchanted wood, sharper and more resilient than steel. Even their shields, round and solid, bore the emblems of their ancestors, with intricate carvings etched into the wood. And when Northern took a look at the city itself, wood, 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 wood,